All right, today I'm excited to welcome Doug Katz to the show. Doug, thanks for joining me. How are you doing today?
Brian, I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
Oh, no problem. We populated up on Podmatch there. I think you actually sent me a message, and man, the message was great. Really piqued my interest. I dug into your profile, and it looked like a perfect match for the show. I love Podmatch. I like to mention it at the
Oh, I
beginning
love it,
here.
man. I love it,
Uh,
love it, love it.
if business owners aren't using podcast guesting to grow their business, I think they're missing a big opportunity. I think Podmatch does a great job, but they brought us together. Could you introduce yourself to my audience, let them know who you are, where you're at now, and then we'd like to circle back and talk about the journey to get there.
Absolutely. Again, I'm Doug Katz. I'm the CEO of NULU Knives, NULU for short. It's an adaptive knife. I'm sure we'll be talking about it. And I am in the Chicago area. I grew up in Michigan, but after serving, ended up going back to the Chicago area. I'm about an hour and 15 minutes northwest of the city, almost closer to Wisconsin, actually.
Okay. All right. I was in New York. I was Western New York growing
Okay.
up, and then I transplanted to Minnesota for 20 plus years, and now my wife and I had taken off into an RV full time, and we're sitting down in Tennessee doing some work for a friend of ours. So
So do you,
I
you just like travel all over the place?
we did for about a year and a half, and then we worked a deal out with somebody that to do some work, and so we sat down, we found a spot to sit down, and we've been in the same spot for about a year and a half now. So we've been full time living in the RV for 3 years.
Oh, wow. Well, I mean, if you've got like experience living in small spaces like the military, right? Like, yeah, you're used to it.
Oh yeah, I'm ready to be out of it. I'm 6'5", so
Oh,
it's a pretty tight quarters, and we
I couldn't
also
tell that by your video. Like I'm 5'8", so I'm like a hobbit, man. That would be easy for me.
we had 3 Saint Bernards when we took off. We're down to 2 at the time now, but yeah, we figured that if we do things as hard as possible, everything seems easier after that. So
I hear that. I hear that, man. I hear that.
so Doug, let's talk about your story to get to where you're at now. You mentioned you were former military. When you were a kid, before you were in the military, was that kind of the path you've always
You
wanted
know,
to take?
it
Or
wasn't, and it's interesting because a lot of my none of my family served. I had a grandfather who actually, like during World War II, served in a civilian capacity. He was like a plumber on submarines, right? You don't really think about that, but he was in Hawaii. So there was some military connection, but not a whole lot. And I've done some reflection on this lately, and it's kind of like I'm on Pluto TV right now. I watch a lot of that kind of. They have Red Dawn on, right? And Red
Mhm.
Dawn has been running out, and I'm like, well, that's kind. I think that '80s sort of reacquainting with sort of a military viewpoint helped, right? Because that was right when sort of the Vietnam stuff was starting to percolate into the zeitgeist and more accepting and understanding what those veterans had been through. So that really drew me. I was one of the sick people who watched Full Metal Jacket and was like, well, that looks fun, right? Like during the basic training. So but I was lucky enough to have people who directed me. So originally the plan was to go ROTC. I really wanted to be a Marine at that point, and I had a great guidance counselor, and she got me acquainted with the service academies. And I was fortunate enough. I joke that it must have been in a year when a lot of people who were better than me weren't applying, but I got appointed to the academy and attended West Point till 93. Yeah, till 93. And then I was in the Army from 93 to 98 in Fort Carson as an artillery officer.
I think that 80s time period, I've read some stuff about it, that it was the rebranding of America, the patriotism, and I think that all feeds right into the military side of it too, where there was a desire to be part of that. So I mean that fits right in. It doesn't surprise me at all. When you went to West Point, what were your intentions? Was it to be career military, or did you have other
No,
aspirations?
yeah, like I'm in a real reflective phase, and I did not plan on going. Well, I take it back. When I was going in, I wanted to be a total, special forces snake eater, hardcore guy, and Then once I was there, I got a little bit less into that because it was a drawdown. So there were a lot of people who, once I got into the military, were saying, don't stay in, right? So I kind of left it to how that experience would be. I kind of had first thought five and fly. That was kind of a joke where you do your 5 years and you go in corporate America. And I was kind of on that path, and I actually regret it. I talk a lot. My daughter's at the Coast Guard Academy, and I talked to her a lot about don't make decisions ahead of time, because I really do think I would have enjoyed a military career, at least a longer one than I did. I think I should have done battery command. I should have done certain things that would have not as check marks, but as things you never get a chance to do again, right? Like the chance to lead that purely, like when you're a platoon leader, that's like a pure opportunity you'll never get again. And we were talking a little bit earlier on about like ADD, like I have ADD. And as a result, like being a founder and an entrepreneur is great. But now I'm making the connection of, man, I used to hate going to the field until it was in the field. And I felt really at home because there were constant things going on that very, very much like connected with my ADD. It was like having the right pins on a plug that fit into the thing. And so I do think I should have gone with my first gut and said, go with this until it no longer provides purpose and everything else. So a little regret there, I guess.
What did you do? What did you come? So you did you graduate from the academy
I did,
and then went and served because that comes with a service requirement, right?
Yeah, I had 5 years, and artillery's got the longest officer basic course of any branch. So I spent a lot of time in Oklahoma in the beginning. And I was actually fortunate enough to exceed what the expectations they had for me were. So when you go to the academy, you get this thing called the whole candidate score. And they look and they say, were you a team captain? Did you play varsity sports? Were you an Eagle Scout? Whatever. And they kind of come up with a numerical rating. And I was pretty low in the incoming class. I bucked that trend. I really took to it. I liked everything about that place. Not as much when I was there as now in retrospect, but I was ranked really highly in my class. So I got the branch and the post that I wanted, and I did well at OBC. And I learned sometimes that has its drawbacks. So I ended up with a very non-standard career. I started as a division fire support officer, division counter artillery, actually is what it was called. And that was like at this very high level, tracking the enemy's artillery to be able to target them. And all my friends went either to the gun line, the fire direction center, or fire support. So I felt like I was missing out on something. And as a result, I didn't get the same esprit de corps. I hung out with my buddies, but it wasn't that daily hanging out. Then after about 2 years there, I moved down to fire support. And then I ended up an intelligence officer. And I think some of that, the artillery is the only branch that has their own artillery, our own intelligence officers, because the systems and all, you just kind of have to understand them better. So I think some of my DIVARTY time, my division artillery time, shaped where they wanted me. And I really enjoyed it. So it was a real non-standard artillery career. But I am seeing now that I shouldn't have poo-pooed it, because it really is helping me, especially the intelligence side has really helped me in business, thinking constantly what could go wrong, right? And with that, it wasn't always just the enemy, what could go wrong with the climate and the weather and all that stuff. So with all of that, I think it's made me a better entrepreneur.
Right. I mean, I've heard that, you hear it a lot in the recruiting side of the military, but you also hear it from former military that as both an employee and as an entrepreneur, just the skills you gain just from existing in the military are a benefit across the board when you get out. I never served. I have plenty of friends and family that did, and I hear it from them too. So when you got out, how did you pick a path to go down? Was it just kind of laid out for you, or?
I love that question, because I got out at a time when the economy was really, really good. So the initial question you asked about what I wanted to do is very, very insightful, because there are temptations and things along the way that can sometimes change maybe what you're meant to be doing. And back then, corporate America saw the value of especially junior military officers, but military in general. They still do. But there was very much a concerted effort to recruit and bring them into the corporate space. And these recruiters would come and say, hey, you're never going to go to the field. You'll double your money. You're going to be able to see your family, right? It was very compelling. So I got out at a time when, and again, it was a drawdown. Remember, like 90, I got out in 98, but they let out a lot of my classmates in like 91. I'm sorry, 90, 94, 95, 91. I was still at the academy. And it was because the Berlin Wall had gone down, and in fact, when I was picking my post, I picked Colorado. And I could have picked Europe. I really wanted to go to Europe, but they were downsizing. And the year before, everybody who picked Europe ended up in Oklahoma. And no disrespect to Oklahoma, but it's just not my home. So it was really driven by that. And the problem is, I do feel it was a little bit of an assembly line, right? It was very much like hey, we're going to place you. But the guy who's placing you, that's how he makes money. So unless there's red flags, they're going to put you in it. And I stayed in my first job, like, I want to say less than 2 years. It was a bad placement. But then, and I wasn't going to go back in. So, I think that, and it's a very different world. Like, that was, almost 30 years ago. So I do think that now we're doing a little better job. I think as a culture in integrating and really recognizing how veterans can be placed, but I really wish there had been the resources to say, dude, I looked back at all my OERs, which are officer evaluation reports, and they all were like, you're a field guy. Somebody should have looked at that and said, you're going to blow your brains out if you go to corporate America. I
think it's even on steroids now, though. You were fortunate enough to be non-deployed. I'm not discounting the mentality of the military non-deployed, because I've known plenty of guys that were not deployed. I'm in the same age bracket as you. I graduated high school in 96, so I was just a little behind you. There is a mentality there,
right?
But now, after 20 years of just a shit show, these guys that have the skill set to be in corporate America, there's just no way that it meshes.
No. And you're 100% right. And you bring up something interesting. Is it really, there was that inflection point right around when I got out, right? So I got out in 98. I left the job that I was in because it just wasn't the right job for me. And then I went to the telecom industry for about 5 years. That was when the telecom bust happened. It was, when soon after that, the .com bust, like all of that stuff reshaped corporate America, right? Pensions disappeared. I think loyalty and innovation died a lot. Right. I think that, and I'm pretty outspoken. I've had some great bosses, but I feel as an entity that generally, and an entity, I'm kind of broad brushstroke in corporate America, you have a hierarchy of people who are doing what they need to not lose their job, right? Risk means that you can lose your job. And I think it's gotten worse and worse and worse. And as a result, it becomes an echo chamber of non-risk within these organizations. Like, well, you don't want to do anything crazy because, boy, if you do that and it fails. Now, I will say, if you go a little rogue and something's successful, boy, your hierarchy is surely willing to take credit for it. And that's what drew me to the, and I look back, there were times when I was never over, I was worked hard in the military, but there was a degree of understanding on the part of my leadership that can only go so long before you burn people out. Right. I had bosses in the civilian world that were perfectly happy to ride the horse until it died and then get on another horse. I don't know if I can swear, they do not give a shit about it. They do not. And
I had somebody point out something on the show one time, that people overwork their job description. So your job description is to do X, Y, and Z, and that's what's expected of you as an employee. And as a good employee, what we feel as a good employee, you do X, Y, and Z, but you also do A, B, G, K. and all that stuff. And that you think that makes you inexpendable, but really when they get rid of you, all they have to do is cover XYZ. You think you provide
100%.
all this extra shit, but really your job description is just XYZ. And I was like, when you look at it like that, it really discourages going above and beyond to make yourself valuable.
Well, there's that, and they have you in they've got you by the short hairs because medical's expensive, so they put you in a situation where they pay you just enough so that you can't that you're secure. And if you save in your 401k, whatever, you can live a great whatever career and retire. But generally, I think that erodes, right? As you look at, hey, I've got expenses, I've got kids, I've got medical, all of that then tends to be the levers that they can pull to create loyalty. And it's not loyalty of ownership in the mission and the vision. Generally, it's ownership in, I like to eat, I like my family to be fed, and I like them to get medical care. And, I think that, it's interesting. I've done some writing. I'm starting to do some writing sort of cathartically, but I have a Substack and I'm working on a piece and I just can't figure it out. I'm tempted to send it to my 19-year-old son about Gen Z and the generations behind us and how we call them, lazy and all this other stuff. And you and I are sitting here talking about we wouldn't work in corporate America. And the dialogue is, well, these kids are bucking corporate America. Maybe they're just smarter than us. Maybe we have to sell them on the value. It's a free market and they grew up in the information age and they know how to shop and find what they're looking for.
Well, the internet changed everything.
Oh, 100%.
We like, you're just a little ahead of me, but we watched it all develop. Like I remember getting the AOL discs in the mail. I remember my first email address. I remember the Apple IIe computer that came home with mom and all that stuff. The internet changed things. And I've had discussions with people that if the internet was around when I was born, like if I was born later, the entrepreneurial spirit that was in me as a kid, coupled with the internet, would have been a game changer. But there's kids now that realize, half of them realize that it's at their fingertips. They don't need to be 18. They don't need, they just need to have an internet connection and the desire to learn, and they can do whatever they want. And then there's the other kids that are just like, I'll just go get my job and everything. I think there's that divide where kids, the light bulb has come on.
Well, and I think the hard part is, one, again, selling them on the value of whatever you're doing. I think, I can tell you, and even talking to my kids' friends, right? My daughter is in her 20s, right? She's at the Coast Guard Academy. My son, my middle one is 19. My younger one's 15, like his kids don't. But I even talk to their friends, right? These are not, I don't think, the way that we portray them. And maybe I'm just talking to the good ones, but it's amazing when you engage them on a level and you understand that, hey, they are in many ways purely capitalist, right? They very, very quickly understand if there's value in what you're talking to them about, and they'll make a decision on whether to you are doing anything. But I also think that within that group, there's a hunger for purpose and engagement and mentorship. So I think we need to take a contra review on it, because again, if you and I, as middle-aged men, are talking about how we would never work in corporate America, then it's a broken system, not broken generations. Right. And I think the one thing missing is, and I actually did write an article about I hope that there becomes a wisdom economy where these kids understand that there is, with all the if you bring technology and intelligence to wisdom, you get this exceptionally strong thing. I've built my company on all older people, but we really want to bring into the brands, as we're launching our brands, younger people who we can build the kind of company we want. And I think that there's got to be more of that. I think that the other thing, and this is what I work on with my kids, and it's a battle, is, and the best I can describe it as another kind of military thing, is GPS was just hitting usability when I hit the military. And there was this tug of war. How important is using a compass anymore?
Right.
And that brings then when you're looking at GPS, you go, this doesn't make sense, right? Like there was one incident, and I'm sure I'm not characterizing it well, but when we went to the National Training Center, where a bunch of vehicles like went into an empty, like a dry riverbed, because they were looking at their GPS, and it was very quickly dawning on everyone that, hey, you've got to understand the basis of how you do it, right? Like using AI for writing is fine if you already know how to write. So I think with them, it's understanding that you might have to be a little Luddite for a while and figure out how to do the things that this becomes a multiplier for. And I just don't think that dialogue is happening. I think that there's this, they'll say, hey, boomer, whatever, and it becomes that dialogue. But it's interesting, just you sit, I've had 3-hour conversations with my kids' friends, and, they want this stuff. So, you hope that they will, and there's existential struggle for them these days. You hope that there'll be a great generation.
I think,
Yeah.
I mean, it all works out. I think the strong, the intelligent all end up rising to the top, and maybe there's more or less, but there's always a leadership level there. So I have hopes. I put my head down and do my thing and just go to it. But hey, was there a point at corporate America? What kind of flipped your switch to become unemployable, as I like to call it? That moment where you're just like, I got to do my own thing. I got to get out of this.
I don't think there's one, right? I think it becomes sort of looking back on the narrative. So when I left the telecom industry to go into lending, I sort of did a half measure, right? I moved from really purely corporate to somewhat entrepreneurial at the point of sale level. And that was after the company I was working for I had a great year. I was in marketing at that point. I was like marketing dense wave division multiplexing stuff, but I had a great year. And I had a decent 15% raise coming and all this. And telecom bust happens, and they were like, well, sorry, I know that we promised you this 15% raise. And oh, by the way, prorated back pay, but it's not in the budget. Sorry. And I said, if that's how you value me, I don't care how many layoffs I've survived. We have a mismatch here, because I feel probably the guy at the top could take a pay cut and isn't, and I am. That's not how this works. So, and I was at a very, very, I'm going to say vulnerable point, not like mentally, but career wise. And a veteran got me into lending, and everything he said was right. You're going to get paid for the work that you do, and there's upside. But then I moved up in management, and I realized lending is as bad as everything else, right? There is an entrepreneurial component to it. But generally, there was one point where I had a friend, and we were trying to figure out, like, how do you do Sharia lending? Like, this was really early on, right? And nobody wanted to touch that. And it was just like, why? Like, why don't we ideate this out? And nobody wanted that. So I think finally, and this is the wrong way to do it. I had a point in my career, and I think it was when I was lending, there was a franchise that ran they were a military-owned franchise, and they ran a contest. And they called me up. They're like, you won this, dude, if you want it. But we're not going to look stupid. So you better give us a yes, and it better be a yes. And it was like a free franchise and all this money from it was like 85, 90 grand. And I didn't take it. I wasn't ready at that point. And I think I always had side hustles and businesses. And I think the kind of slow collapse of the lending and real estate industries, which I think is continuing. I think if ever there were industries that technology can add benefit for the user, the customer and everybody, I think lending is it. I would be lying if I didn't. And I think real estate to some extent is similar. So it's not really quiet quitting, right? Because I have my license. I actually still do some lending with a 87 West Point grads company, and I have my license there, and I do that. But I hit a point where I'm like, this isn't for me. And around that time, my wife had gotten me a class on knife making, and we were moving at that time because my father was relocating with us. So we were ready to move from where we were at, and we were looking for a home with 2 master suites. And by chance, this one had a huge shop, like a 20 by 20 workshop as part of the garage. And the knife smithing with sort of other things I was getting into. And understand, I was this suburban kid who didn't think I could make anything. And that's another narrative I hope your listeners can get, is never, like, if people tag you and say, oh, you can't, you're not that guy, prove them wrong, because
Right.
it's, so for me, it was a matter of like, I had tried a couple of other businesses, and then this was the right one. And what I would tell people is create the mechanism that generates the conditions for your exit. So with this knife, I had people looking at it going, I get this. This could sell. Primarily my kids and stuff, but they'll be honest. They'll be hugely honest. So that was a good thing. And then I started picking up good partners along the way. And I think that set the stage. And more people, this is why I like using over 50 like me, is because many of them are sunsetting corporate careers and other things. Some have been let go because of ageism. And these guys, this is like, I'm calling it, I'm sorry, like I name my stuff. I'm kind of calling it the Tarantino principle, because I would remember every time I'd watch a Tarantino movie, he would find some obscure actor who was a huge star in the past. And they would be in this movie and you'd be like, holy shit, that guy's amazing. Or that gal's amazing.
Right.
So finding these people has it's become something of itself. And for me, that was when I said, I just have to do it. Now, I think that people who want to do that have to make right decisions along the way, right? I've invested, so I've got a decent retirement that at least there's a nest egg. All the things to be, you have to create the conditions. You have to create that alchemy where the formula will turn into the, whatever flavor you want.
Right.
And that happened. And for me, it was also this aspect of saying now, and this is something I think everybody should do. And it's trite, but find your genuine self, right? Like when I was in the military, I was less buttoned down and controlled than I was in corporate America. Like, I'm the guy who, when I have a tie on, like I'm trying to pull the tie off, because it's like, so all of a sudden, when I was like, who was I in the field, and bringing that to being a founder, that's when it clicked. And in a way, I decided at that point to burn the ships at the shore and create a situation where I couldn't backtrack. And that was when the tattoos went below the elbows, because I said, and maybe it was a subconscious aspect, right? Yeah, a subconscious aspect of making myself less desirable to that world.
Right.
But something really popped at that point. And I said, it's really interesting. And the zeitgeist more now is about this than when it was when I was in corporate America. But I'm sorry. I thought I put that on rank. Sorry about that.
Yeah, you're right.
So I looked and I said, it's very interesting. If you look at who people lionizing in the corporate space, it's the iconoclast. It's the dude who says, F you, this is who I am. On the large scale, that's Musk, for whatever, whatever. But I even look at, like, I've been a T-Mobile customer for a long time. I'm less happy with them now. But when John Laguerre ran that company, he was like, F you, I'm going to do whatever. He was very disruptive. You look kind of across the board at these lionized, held in high esteem leaders, and they're all people who said, I am going to be me, because that's what's going to make this successful. That's what's going to turn the vision into reality. And I think that there are probably corporations that could occur. I just never found them. But I think when people do that, they are more likely to be true to themselves, to say, this is not where I belong. And
so you're building that space. You're building a space that people that jive with you can be comfortable in, and somebody else is gonna find that other space. Somebody else is gonna create that. Doug, we're kind of running up on time. If you want to talk about NULU real quick, and tell people where they can find it and where they can find more about you, and I'll give you some time to plug your stuff, and we'll wrap things up.
Absolutely. So NULU came about because I'm a disabled vet. I have injuries that are, that I have a rating for, and some that I don't with the VA. But, I played rugby and martial arts I just beat my body up. So I have some major upper extremity issues. I love to cook. I knew how to make knives for a while. There I couldn't cook. And I was out in my shop and I was kind of hanging out. And I have a lot of steel around that I just play with, and I saw kind of this circular design, and I had experimented a little with the NULU knife, which is an indigenous knife that that we wanted to keep part of the name out of respect for the indigenous cultures that created an amazing knife, but we took it to the next level. So it's a knife that has what we call force transfer geometry that creates the most efficient cutting experience I think that you can have. And that takes the stress off the upper extremities. And what it does is it creates an ability for people who don't have issues to cut more efficiently, but for those who do, and those who are in careers that are tied to food service that get repetitive stress injuries, we can prevent that to some degree as well.
Nice.
So we just finished a Kickstarter in mid-December. We're updating the website to get ready to be able to do our harder launch in April timeframe. We should be fulfilling the Kickstarter stuff in mid-March. Then people who are interested in acquiring one, they can always find me. Go to Doug Katz, search my name. You'll probably find me. I got a pretty big digital footprint. But they could also go to nuluknives.com. They could go to Kickstarter. Our stuff is still up as we're fulfilling. We're all over social. So they can, if they look for my name or NULU, they can find it. Or if people want help, I have gotten here through the agency of others, and I stole that completely from Scott Galloway, big fan of his, but he says success is in the agency of others. And I 100% believe it. And I want to pay it forward. So anyone who wants to find me, Doug, it's dcatz@goredleg.com. That's my email. And anybody who I can help, please let me help you. The red leg thing, if people are wondering, a red leg is an artilleryman from way back. They used to wear red pants. And the way my company is put together is Red Leg Innovation is our venture studio, more or less, with me and my partners. NULU is our first brand that I'm the CEO of. We'll be launching other things. And actually, a lot of what we want to do is help other veterans, especially disabled veterans who work in our space. We're not tech. We're not mechanical stuff. We're really simple products. We'd love to help them too. So especially veterans who might be listening, there's a ton of resources. The other thing I would tell people out there is if you got an idea, reach out to me and maybe I can point you in the right resources, because there's tons of free resources, especially for veterans, but a lot from the government as well. And as we're hearing about things that are being taken off the table, I hope to God that legislators on both sides look and say, anything that's related to entrepreneurialism in this country needs to be sacrosanct, because we're losing, I think after World War II, the greatest generation, right? Like 85% of businesses were owned by World War II vets. We need to get that back in terms of entrepreneurialism, not necessarily just vets, but ownership in the society, ownership in people's business, and not being dependent upon what we were talking before, corporate America, because they lose their leverage when we take it back.
Right. Doug, I will get all those links in the description. I encourage people to reach out and converse with you and check out your stuff and support your business and get help if they're going down their own path. I appreciate you being here, and I look forward to watching NULU grow, and hopefully we talk to you soon.
Absolutely, and thanks for having me.